On this episode of the show, I have with me Deborah Hanus. She is co-founder and CEO at Sparrow. We're going to talk a little bit about her journey to becoming a founder. She spent some time at MIT, and we'll talk to her about the steps from there to Sparrow's launch. And she is tackling a pretty significant problem, and she's tackling it at scale. And we'll talk to her a little bit about that, about hiring, culture, raising some venture capital, and hopefully some lessons learned in there as well. Deborah, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, could you tell everyone what Sparrow does?
Sparrow is a high-tech, high-touch solution that makes it simple for companies to provide their employees with leave across the United States and Canada. And we've actually saved our customers more than 300 million in payroll costs recently. So we're very excited about that milestone.
Very cool. All right. Well, that is a fantastic milestone. And I guess we'll touch on that a little bit as we go. And most of this episode is about your journey from being in academia to becoming a founder. I guess out of curiosity, when I do see somebody who spent some time at great schools, pursues a PhD. Is being a founder something that was on your radar, or is it something that just opportunity intersection with right moments and boom, here you are?
I would say the latter more than anything else. I would say that I think that sometimes people underestimate the extent to which academia can actually be a good training ground for being a founder. Like, there are a lot of things that are very different. Being a founder, necessarily, you have to move much faster. Velocity matters a lot more. But I think in academia, you spend a lot of time, it's great training ground for the early days. Like in academia, you spend a lot of time being told that your ideas are stupid. You spend a lot of time hearing no, hearing people don't like the way this paper looks. They don't like the way you presented that. And I think that it does build a certain resilience that can be helpful in starting a company. Because in the early days, if you're doing something new that other people aren't doing already, like in the case of Sparrow, when Sparrow started, there really was nothing like Sparrow anywhere across the market. And if you're doing that, then sort of necessarily, if you're creating something new, if you're creating a new industry, not everyone is going to get it. At which point you will have some number of people who think your ideas are stupid, who will tell you shouldn't be doing it that way, you should be doing it this way. That said, ultimately I would say in Sparrow's case, there was both that, both I already had that resilience, but I would say in our case, it was clear that our customers wanted this. Investors could think the idea was stupid. My friends could think the idea was stupid. But it was clear, when we spoke to people in HR, people who were going out on leave, it was just an absolutely massive pain point for them. Like, not necessarily everyone in HR is thinking about leave management, but there is someone on every HR team for whom leave is the absolute worst part of their day, the thing that stresses them out the most. They're on Google trying to figure out the basics of compliance, coordinating with employment lawyers. They know that they're not really creating the best employee experience. They know that the employee is confused. It's taking them a lot of time at the same time that they're having this major life event. And they really just want someone else to take care of it. And that's what Sparrow does, is, we really manage that process end to end. I think what was really striking to me was just the extent to which so much of the problem is a data problem, making sure that the right people have the right information at the right time. It was sort of, at first, the first time I saw this was when I was halfway through my PhD at Harvard in machine learning, and there was this 1 6-month period where 6 of my friends went out on some kind of leave, parental leave, medical leave, caregiving leave. All of them struggled with the paperwork, the process, the timing. They needed to spend a lot of extra hours on hold with state agencies. all just to figure out the basics of where their pay was coming from. And I mean, my friends had incredible jobs in tech at Google, Amazon, Facebook. I mean, if these companies haven't figured it out, like imagine what it's like for the average person. And what we found is what was really striking was just the extent to which, as we start digging more into how HR teams are managing it, how the process is so much more painful for HR. And a lot of it is because a lot of these things are new. 30 years ago, there were, I guess 35 years ago, there were no regulations related to leave. Just over 30 years ago, we got FMLA, which is just certain companies of certain types with certain numbers of employees. If you're at a company like that, then you can't be fired specifically for taking leave. You can be fired for other reasons, but it's just that very limited job protection. Then there was sort of nothing for another 10 years. And then in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been all this interest around federal paid leave. But so far, nothing's been passed at the federal level. I'm still, fingers crossed, hoping. Instead, everything's getting passed at the state level, the city level, the county level. So for HR teams, especially as HR teams with any sort of distributed workforce, staying on top of all of this compliance, it's sort of just become this absolutely insurmountable problem. It's physically, it should not be done by a person. Like it actually should be done by a software system. Sparrow built our leave compliance engine to help with that. And I would say really what we've been building over the last several years is just we've made sure that we have all of the right data in the right place, to order then provide this experience where from HR's perspective, they have exactly the information they need when they need it. And from the employee perspective, you can think of the experience as almost like TurboTax for leave paperwork. You can easily see exactly what your job protection looks like, what your pay looks like. Behind the scenes, all of the paperwork and interfacing with state agencies gets taken care of for you so that you can actually have whatever time your company provides for major life events like a parental leave or caring for your own health with a medical leave, caring for family members. You can have that time to actually focus on that major life event rather than spend the entire time stressed out by phone calls with state agencies and how you're going to get paid next.
I guess you mentioned, being in academia, it's a good training ground in early days of being a founder. I guess if you're in academia now, I do get asked that question sometimes about how is that transition. When you look at the shift, obviously you went from being in academia, some internships at some very nice companies, organizations, into being a founder. What is it that, I guess if you could look back in hindsight, is there something you could have done? Is there anything you could have done to prepare yourself for the transition?
No, I don't think so.
Just rip it off like a Band-Aid and just dive right on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in the early days of a company, there are two reasons why companies don't work out. And I would say actually this probably extends even to the later days of a company. Like the reason companies die, it's not because of anything specific. It's not because you brought on the wrong leader. It's not because you didn't get this one sale. There are a lot of things that can feel very important, but none of that is really going to kill the company. The way companies end is either you run out of cash or you run out of morale. You lose your will to keep going on. And I think that both of those, I think in the early days of a startup, people talk about how it is an emotional roller coaster. And I think what they're referring to is, thinking about this as, a little bit of a data nerd. I think what they're referring to is just there are very few data points and it's very easy to overfit to those data points. So you can feel like, oh, this person, my friend told me my idea is dumb. This customer doesn't like the product yet. This, all these little things, they can feel emotionally like this is just never going to work. Like I'm not winning every moment, so it's not going to work. Whereas similarly, you can just, you get these little good data points like, oh, someone likes the product, or oh, someone might invest, and it can feel like this is just the best ever. Someone believes in me. This is going to be a wild success. Um, Whereas I think it actually, at least in my opinion, actually, running a scaled company is much easier than running a company in the first 6 months or the first 12 months. And it's just because you have more data points to work with, rather than it being I would say like it's actually probably normal at a Series B stage company, a Series C stage company for, at any given time, maybe 20% of everything is on fire. And maybe 50% of everything is going great. And 30% is in between. And that's just a normal day. Like you can't really, if that's a normal day, you have a lot more data points to tell you that that is what is going on. And so you can just know, all right, 50% of everything is great. And these fires are fine. I mean, fine, they're there, but we'll fix them. And, tomorrow there will be new fires. And it's just easier to have like a much more regular set point. Whereas I think with that early fitting, that overfitting that can happen early in a company's life cycle, when it's just maybe one or two people and it's more about one or two people's emotions and their state of mind and how they're feeling about things than having an actual full data set of what's going on. It can actually be, it can be much more difficult. And I would say like really it's that sort of fundamentally in the early days, it's, do you choose to keep going or do you choose to do something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's actually a very fair viewpoint, and honestly, I think it's good for people to hear. I mean, when it comes to leadership, when you're in your PhD program, obviously there's opportunities to have leadership skills built all throughout your academic career. You went to fantastic schools, so I'm sure those opportunities were there. Being a CEO running a startup, as you said, all these different things on fire. As you've kind of been in the CEO role, I mean, it's been 7+ years you've been in this position. Are there skills that you started developing that when you look back, I guess, from the beginning and you reflect on your time, in academia and kind of just note those particular skills, especially on the leadership side?
Certainly my leadership has developed a lot in the last 7 years. So, certainly the core of who I am and how I function, how I think about things has not really. I think some of my biggest learnings have been around scaling the company, like the way you communicate with 5 people and is going to be a lot different than how you communicate with 250 people. And I think that some of the best things that we've done and some of the things that I think have made the team feel most supported are taking time to think, what is it that is really important for the broader team to know and on what level? Making sure that we're, fundamentally, I think this is just the basics of change management, but I think often people forget about it. There are things like, when someone joins a company, Sparrow invests a lot in new hire onboarding and that training because, especially if you're scaling I would say especially as a fully remote company, but really for any company, when you're growing quickly, the worst thing that can happen is if you have people working towards different goals. So it's important that everyone has real clarity on what are the goals of the company, what are the different aspects of the team doing, what's important to different aspects of the team, what is it that they're judged on. All of these things can sort of help you both appreciate your colleagues, which makes it easier to work cross-functionally, as well as making sure that within your team you're really focused on the right things. And so that, if you hire 200 people or 300 people, all 300 of those people are working towards the same things rather than, 200 people working on the same things and 100 people working against them, which actually is very easy to happen. And I would say happens at all sorts of larger companies. And then I would say second is probably then thinking, really trying to think through when there's a big change or or when there's a big announcement on our roadmap, or how we're changing about how we're thinking about things, making sure that we're consistently thinking through what is the information that each person needs to know in their role, and then consistently asking for feedback. Asking for feedback before the announcement, making sure that you're answering people's major questions. Because if you don't know what their questions are in advance, it's very easy to just talk about things that they don't care about, or sound a bit out of touch. But if you're addressing, I would say, even 80 to 90% of the questions, most people will feel like, okay, that's essentially what I wanted to hear, and like this was a real transparent conversation. Similarly, I think. And then the third thing that I would say that is important, in addition to sort of like really thinking through that data, and then asking for feedback at the other end, asking people like, do you feel like you got the answers you wanted in that meeting? Do you feel like you understand what next steps are? I really love asking the question, what do you think were the main points of that meeting? It can tell me, do they think the main points were the same things that I thought? Or were they hearing it from a very different perspective or viewpoint? At which point that allows me to refine my message in the future. And then third, I would say also just thinking through the employee journey, like how I think people often think about the customer journey. And that ends up looking like, but it's a little less common for people to say, be that thoughtful about hiring and building a team. But, you can actually get to a point where you can say, like, I would say setting someone up for success in their professional career can go all the way back to recruiting, making sure that your recruiters are really well educated in the roles that they're hiring for, making sure that they have a strong connection with the hiring managers, upcoming changes that are happening in the team. So that to make sure that they're setting the right expectations, not just for what the role is today, what it was 6 months ago, but where it's going to be in 6 months. Then also thinking, how do we want people to feel during their onboarding? At the end of the onboarding, what are the major takeaways that we want them to have? When they meet their manager, what should that look like? When they have their first performance review, whether it's good or bad, what should that look like? What would we wish for them? What support would we wish for them to feel that they had in that moment? When they have their first promotion, what does that look like? I think often they stop the new hire onboarding, if that. And I think that the more detailed you can sort of think through each of these points is really in a similar way to the way you think about the product roadmap or the customer journey. You're making sure that you really understand making sure that you're setting the right expectations for what the role will look like, I would say is really probably one of the most important steps in really setting someone up for success in their professional career, and setting the right culture, and just it shows that you respect your team enough and everyone on the team enough to think through this with them, and it really sets the tone for them as well as they think through change management for the team.
So obviously, you guys are in a business where you are supporting employee experience. You guys are solving a critical problem. You identified and kind of spoke about that. When it comes to how Sparrow internally operates, the imprint that you would hope you've had on the culture of the company itself, your own employees, being so mindful of that employee experience, how has that shaped how you see and envision the company's culture and how it's growing?
Absolutely. One of Sparrow's values, company values, is scale intentionally. I think Facebook is famous for saying, I think one of their early values was move fast and break things. We're a compliance company. We can't break things, but we do need to move fast. So our answer to that is making sure that we're scaling intentionally, and you're really making sure that we're sort of running these small scale experiments and being thoughtful about our change management to make sure that we're building systems that we believe aren't just going to work today, but will actually, we take, sometimes it makes sense to take a moment to slow down before you speed up, in order to make sure that you really have the right process that is going to do what you need it to in the long term, so you're not needing to rebuild things every 5 minutes. And I would say we absolutely do that on the people side as well. And it's definitely had an impact on Sparrow's culture. Something I've sort of something that I would say surprised me is, I mean, so many tech companies struggle with diversity of all sorts. Sparrow has no diversity initiatives. We've never had any diversity initiatives. And we are, I think, 60% female, roughly half people of color, 20% LGBTQ. And really, I think it has just come from, we've tried to be thoughtful about our hiring process, and we've tried to make sure that, we are sourcing from a variety of different sources. And we've tried to make sure that our interviews are testing skills, not biases. We train our interviewers in unconscious, like, really, we're just doing the basics, everything that everyone says that you should do. And it's working. And like but I also see how it's very easy to, slip on any one of those things and end up in a very different situation. Something that I thought was sort of funny in the very early days of Sparrow is, I think, like, our the diversity statistics that most people look at, like race, gender, things like this, they've all basically been the same. They're all basically the same across levels, managerial levels, etc. But I think when we were like 20 people, I realized everyone loved cats and tea. We didn't test for that anywhere in the interview process. And certainly now that the team is larger, people have different interests. But there are still a lot of animal lovers. Sparrow does not really have, your average Sparrow is much more into things like tea and coffee than, a happy hour. And I think there are always some things that you can control for. But I would say, again, as a data person, if you're consistently making sure that you have a broad data set across certain dimensions, there are going to be other dimensions that you're not going to have a diverse data set. So I would say that's, there are sort of funny elements like that. And I would say building the team, but, overall, I'm very proud of the Sparrow culture, and I'm very proud of the Sparrow team and everything that they've accomplished. And I think a lot of it does come back to, those scaling intentionally, making sure that we are all aligned on what it is we're trying to do. And then, being thoughtful about making sure that we're getting the right people in the right roles who, really are mission aligned and want to be working on what we're working on.
I guess maybe final question, to kind of extend your thoughts there. Obviously, you guys are well funded now. The company will grow, particularly when it comes to this cultural aspect. it is interesting that people have gravitated towards tea and cats. I mean, it's it's something that people will share. I like tea, so I'd be in half of that conversation. I'm allergic to cats, so that would be a little bit harder for me. But I guess when you see the company growing, as you're going to be expanding and you're going to be hiring more people, is it a concern, or is it something to think about as you start having to hire, I don't know, 2x the amount of people, that culture will shift, and it might shift for the better, it might shift for the worse. I mean, we don't know, we can't see that, but I mean, is that something you think about, that culturally, as you hire and you add different skill sets, that some of those things will start shifting, or is that just evolution? You just have to roll with the punches.
It is something that we've thought about. We actually, when we were about 30 people, maybe like a couple million in revenue at the time, we actually, the leadership team got together, and this is something that we thought a lot about. And what we came back to, I would say that was when we really crystallized our company values. And what we came back to is those company values sort of articulate what we want to be hiring for, what we want to be training people in, what we want to be what we want to be rewarding, what we want to be performance managing against. And we make sure that we want to make sure that those things are aligned. And we want that to be true when we're 50 people, 100 people. Now, I would say those things are still true when we're 250 people. I hope it's still true when we're 500 or more. But every person you bring on, when you're 50 people, when you're 200 people, like, they bring their whole selves to work. They bring good things, bad things, neutral things, their love of sports, their love of ferrets. It really is those are all things that they bring to work. And my hope is that as we scale, the things that matter, the mission alignment, the alignment to our values, that those are the things that we're able to keep the same. And I expect and honestly hope that everything else will change, that we certainly, it is no longer true that everyone loves tea and cats. Today people have a much broader set of interests that showing up across Zulip. We do still have a specific channel to discuss cats and a specific channel to discuss dogs now too.
There you go.
But all of that said, we want to make sure that we're designing a culture that can support everyone in working, as long as they're aligned with the mission, they're aligned with the company values, they're aligned with what they're trying to do, and they have the right skills to contribute to the team in that role.
I love it. I was going to say, I appreciate your time, Deborah, coming on, sharing with us. I think we could probably extend this for double the length and still not cover everything we want to, but I know you got to get back to it. If somebody does have a follow-up question, somebody wants to learn more, somebody has a question of how you've been scaling, is there a good way of touching base and learning more?
Yeah, absolutely. You can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, just first name, last name, Deborah Hanus. If you want to learn more about Sparrow specifically, we are Sparrow Inc. across almost all of our social media. And you can learn more about the company at sparrow.com or sparrow.com/careers will tell you more about our company culture.
Awesome. I definitely appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. And hopefully we'll do a part 2 and dive into even more stuff down the road.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, obviously, Deborah shared with us her background and her journey from being in academia to launching Sparrow, some of what she had to learn, adjust, adapt, grow. Obviously, tackling a significantly important problem, and they're well funded, and we'll have to go through and transform over the years. And she talked about Slack channels and how we've added the dog to the cat channel, and who knows next 50 employees what they'll add, but they're very inclusive and it's obvious in how she's operating. So share this episode with somebody else, and hopefully they will appreciate the content. And if you do have a question, Deborah provides some links. You guys can reach out to either Sparrow or her via those. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.